My name is Daniel Marsh, and 3 weeks ago, my mother sat across from me at the kitchen table, folded her hands like she was about to deliver a eulogy, and told me that my dress uniform, the one I bled for, the one 12 of my brothers never got to wear home again, was not welcome at my own brother's wedding. "It's not about you, Danny," she said. "It's about optics. Please, just wear the navy suit. For your brother." I want you to sit with that sentence for a second, because I did. I sat with it for 3 weeks. I smiled, I nodded, I said, "Sure, Mom," and I hung my uniform in the back of my closet behind winter coats nobody wears in Georgia. What my parents didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that 14 of my former unit already had their tickets booked. They weren't invited. Nobody sent them a save the date. They were coming for one reason only, to stand beside me, whether my family wanted them there or not. By the time the reception hall in Savannah went quiet that Saturday evening, my parents would understand exactly why leaving that uniform in the closet was the worst request they ever made of me. But we're not there yet. Let me back up, because you need to understand what led to that folding chair scraping against hardwood, and 14 men and women rising to their feet in perfect, silent unison. I'm the older brother, which, in most families, means something. In mine, it meant I was the placeholder, the kid my parents raised while they waited for the version of a son they actually wanted to show off. My brother Ethan is 4 years younger than me, and from the time he could walk, he was the plan. Piano lessons, private tutoring, a legacy spot at my father's old university, an internship arranged through a family friend before he'd even declared a major. My father, Richard Marsh, built a mid-sized insurance brokerage from nothing, and Ethan was always going to inherit it, the office, the country club membership, the Sunday dinners where my father introduced him to clients like a prize horse. Me? I enlisted at 19. Not out of desperation, not because I had nowhere else to go. I had a partial scholarship sitting on the table when I signed those papers. I did it because I wanted something that was mine, something no one had handed me, and because 3 of my high school friends were already overseas and I couldn't stand the thought of sitting in a lecture hall while they carried rifles through places I couldn't pronounce. My parents' reaction was not pride. My mother cried, but not the good kind of crying. My father didn't speak to me for the better part of a month. When I finally left for basic training, there was no dinner, no send-off. Ethan drove me to the bus station because our parents had a client dinner. I did 2 tours. I'm not going to walk you through the details of what happened over there. Some of it isn't mine to tell, and some of it I still don't have the words for. What I'll tell you is this. I came home with a Bronze Star I never mentioned at Thanksgiving, a limp that flares up when it rains, and a group of people who understood me better after 6 months than my own parents did after 26 years. I call them my unit. Some people call them a family. After what happened at my brother's wedding, family started to feel like the more accurate word, because the people who share your blood don't always earn that title, and the people who don't share it sometimes deserve it more than anyone. Ethan's wedding was always going to be an event. He was marrying Victoria Ashcombe Reyes, daughter of a state senator and a woman who ran 3 charity foundations that all seemed to exist primarily to be photographed at. The wedding was booked at a restored 19th-century mansion outside Savannah, 240 guests, a raw bar, a live 12-piece band, and I later learned, a seating chart that had been revised 11 times to avoid offending anyone with actual political relevance. I was invited, of course. I was the best man. Ethan asked me himself, and for a moment, I let myself believe that meant something had shifted. That maybe, for one day, I'd stop being the inconvenient chapter of the Marsh family story. Then came the phone call from my mother, 3 weeks before the wedding. "Danny, honey, I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear it the right way." I already knew from her tone that I wasn't going to like it. Victoria's father, Senator Ashcombe, well, you know how political things are right now. There are certain guests, certain donors, who have very strong feelings about the military. Not you, obviously, not personally, but the optics of a uniform at a society wedding like this, it can read a certain way. Victoria's mother mentioned it to me at the cake tasting, and I just think, to keep the peace, it would be so much easier if you just wore the suit we bought you. The navy one. You'll look so handsome. I asked her directly, are you asking me not to wear my dress blues to my own brother's wedding? There was a pause. Then, I'm asking you to think about your brother's day and not make it about anything else. I didn't yell. I didn't hang up. I said, okay, Mom, and I meant it in the moment, as a kind of surrender. What I didn't say, what I didn't even fully admit to myself yet, was that somewhere underneath the calm, something in me had gone very, very still. The kind of still that happens right before you make a decision you already know you can't take back. I called my old squad leader, Marcus Webb, that same night. Not to complain. Just to talk, the way you do with people who've seen you at your lowest and didn't flinch. They don't want the uniform there, I told him. Optics, apparently. Marcus was quiet for a second. Then he said the words that changed everything. You know we'd come, right? If you wanted us there. I laughed it off. Told him it was a nice thought, but it was a wedding, not a reunion. I didn't ask him to come. I want to be clear about that, because what happened next wasn't something I orchestrated. It was something that happened because of who those 14 people are, because loyalty like that doesn't wait for an invitation. Here's the part of the story my parents still don't fully know, even now. 3 years earlier, during my second tour, my unit was pinned down during an ambush outside a checkpoint that isn't important to name. I'm not going to dramatize it for you, because the men and women who were there don't need it dramatized, they lived it. What matters is that I made a decision that day that I've never talked about at a family dinner, never brought up at a holiday, never once used to win an argument with my father about whether my life meant anything. 2 of the people who would later stand up in that reception hall are alive today because of a choice I made in about 4 seconds. Choices that don't feel brave in the moment. They feel like the only thing your body will let you do. I received a commendation for it. I never told my parents the details. My mother found out I'd been awarded something and asked, almost offhand, is that a big one? I told her it didn't matter. She let the subject drop, the way she let most things about my service drop, because in her mind, my choices had already cost her the version of a son she wanted. She didn't need reminders of the version she got instead. But my unit knew. My unit always knows. And in the particular, unspoken code that exists among people who've carried each other through the worst days of their lives, there's a rule that doesn't get written down anywhere. When someone in your unit is disrespected, you show up. Not for confrontation. Not for a scene. You show up because your presence says something louder than any argument could. 14 of them decided, without telling me, to fly into Savannah for a wedding they weren't invited to. The morning of the wedding, I put on the navy suit. I stood in front of the hotel mirror for a long time, adjusting a tie that felt like it belonged to someone else. My uniform stayed folded in the garment bag in the closet, exactly where my mother wanted it. I told myself it was fine. I told myself weddings are about the couple, not about me, and that showing up and being quietly present was its own kind of love for my brother, even if Ethan had gone suspiciously silent on the subject the one time I brought it up with him directly. Mom mentioned something, he'd said, not meeting my eyes. I don't really have an opinion. That non-answer told me everything about where I stood in the family hierarchy that week. The ceremony was beautiful, if you like the kind of beautiful that costs as much as a house. String quartet, a garden dripping with white orchids, 240 guests in an arc of pastel and navy and champagne silk. I stood at the altar as best man, said my lines, held the rings, watched my brother's hands shake as he said his vows. For a moment, watching Ethan look at Victoria like she was the only person in the world, I forgot to be angry. I was just happy for him. Then came the reception. I noticed the arrivals before anyone else did because I was the one standing near the entrance to the tent, half listening to a conversation between my father and a business associate about tax brackets. A black SUV pulled up the gravel drive, then another. Men and women stepped out in dress uniforms, pressed, decorated, exact. I recognized the first one before he'd even turned around. Marcus Webb, Staff Sergeant, 6'3", the kind of presence that makes rooms rearrange themselves. I felt my stomach drop, not from anger, but from something closer to disbelief. Then 13 more followed him. People I hadn't seen in person in over a year, some I hadn't seen since the day we all flew home in different directions to different lives. Rodriguez, Chan, Okafor, Delacroix-Simmons, Petrov. Names that used to mean the difference between making it through a night and not. They didn't storm in. They didn't make a scene at the door. They simply walked, in formation, toward the tent, found the small block of unclaimed seats near the back that the wedding planner, thank God for wedding planners who don't ask too many questions when uniformed strangers politely request seating, had scrambled to arrange. My mother spotted them before I could get to her. I watched her face go through about 4 different expressions in the span of 2 seconds: confusion, recognition, panic, and something that might have been the beginning of shame, though she buried it fast. "Daniel," she hissed, pulling me aside near the bar. "What is this? Who are these people?" "They're my unit, Mom." "You invited them?" "After everything I asked you." "I didn't invite them," I said, and it was the truth, and something about saying it out loud made my chest feel lighter than it had in weeks. "They came on their own." The toast started around 8. My father gave his polished, rehearsed, full of stories about Ethan's childhood achievements, a joke about the senator's golf handicap that landed well with the Ashcombe side of the room. Then it was my turn as best man. I'd written a version of this speech 3 separate times. The first version was safe, generic jokes, a line about Ethan stealing my clothes as a kid, the usual. Standing at that microphone, looking out at 250-some faces, and then at 14 very specific faces near the back who hadn't said a word all night, but whose presence I could feel like a change in air pressure, I put the note cards down. "I'm not going to read what I wrote," I said. "I'm going to tell you something true instead." I talked about Ethan genuinely, warmly, the things I actually love about my brother, because whatever tension exists in my family, it was never Ethan's fault, and I needed the room to understand that before anything else happened. I talked about watching him grow from a kid who used to follow me around the backyard into a man who found someone who looks at him like he hung the moon. And then I said this: weddings are about bringing people together. My family and I don't always agree on what belonging looks like. I was asked not to wear my uniform tonight because someone worried about what it might say about this family. I want to say, for the record, that I understand that concern came from love, even if I didn't agree with it. The room had gone very quiet. My mother's face had gone white. But there are 14 people in this room tonight who didn't get an invitation, who flew in on their own dime, who put on their own uniforms because 6 years ago, in a place none of us like to talk about, we made a promise to each other. That promise was simple: we don't let each other stand alone. Not on the worst day of our lives, and not, apparently, on someone else's wedding day. I looked at Marcus. I nodded once. And then, without a word between them, because that's the part that still gets me, the part I'll never fully explain to people who weren't there, all 14 of them rose to their feet. Not chaotic. Not scattered. In one motion, like a held breath finally released, chairs scraping back in a ripple down the row, spines straightening, chins lifting. 14 people who had bled beside me, who had carried me and been carried by me, standing at attention in a Savannah reception, tent full of orchids and senators and cake that cost more than a car payment. Marcus stepped forward, just slightly, and said 4 words that I will hear for the rest of my life: "We stand with him." Nobody clapped right away. There was a silence in that tent that felt like the entire room recalibrating, 250 people trying to understand, in real time, what they were witnessing, and why it mattered more than any toast, any orchid arrangement, any carefully managed seating chart. Then Senator Ashcombe himself, the man my mother had been so terrified of offending, stood up. He was a Vietnam-era veteran's son himself, it turned out, something my mother had never bothered to actually learn about the family she was so desperate to impress. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and began to clap, slow and deliberate, until the whole room rose with him. I looked at my mother. She wasn't clapping. She was crying, the real kind this time, one hand pressed over her mouth, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't know if the tears were about embarrassment or something closer to regret. My father found me near the edge of the tent afterward, away from the music, away from the guests reassembling themselves into polite conversation clusters. "You didn't tell me it would be like that," he said. "Not an apology. Not yet." My father doesn't apologize in a straight line, he circles it. "I didn't know it would be like that either," I said honestly. "Your mother's mortified." "Your mother should be proud," I said, and I watched something flicker across his face, the beginning, maybe, of an argument he didn't actually want to have in the middle of his younger son's wedding reception. "What happened out there," he said instead, quieter now with the ambush. "The commendation. You never told us the whole story. You never asked." He didn't have an answer for that, and for the first time in my adult life, I watched my father sit with the silence instead of filling it with something easier. Later that night, my mother found me by the valet stand, waiting for my car. She didn't apologize in the direct way I might have wanted, either. That's not how my family operates, and I've stopped expecting a version of them that doesn't exist. But she said, "I didn't understand what I was asking you to leave behind." "It's okay, Mom." "It's not," she said. "But thank you for wearing the suit anyway. And thank them for me. Whatever they did tonight, I don't fully understand it, but I felt it. I didn't need more than that. I'm not interested in rewriting my parents into people they aren't." What I needed, what I'd apparently needed for longer than I let myself admit, was for them to see, even for one night, what it looks like when loyalty shows up uninvited and stands anyway. Ethan called me 2 days later. He'd been quiet the whole reception, caught between his new in-laws and the storm that had rolled through his wedding day, but he wanted me to know something. "Victoria's dad asked about you all night," he said. "Wants to have you over sometime." Said something about how the toughest men he ever knew were the quietest about it, until it mattered. We talked for a long time that call, longer than we had in years, honestly. Ethan told me he'd known, deep down, that Mom's request was wrong, and that his silence about it was its own kind of cowardice he was still working through. I told him I understood. Weddings make cowards of people trying to keep the peace. I don't hold it against him the way I might have a year ago. As for the 14 who stood that night, we still talk about it, half joking, half reverent, the way you talk about the moments that end up defining a friendship you didn't know needed defining. Marcus tells people it was the easiest decision he ever made. "You don't RSVP to standing by your people," he says. "You just show up." My uniform hangs in my closet now, not behind the winter coats anymore, but in front, where I can see it. I don't know if I'll wear it to the next family wedding, the next holiday, the next event where my parents worry about optics over honesty. But I know this. I don't need permission anymore to be proud of who I became in it, or of the people who put theirs on for me without being asked. Some families are built by blood. Mine got rebuilt, that Saturday night in Savannah, by 14 people who understood something my own parents took 30 years to learn, that respect doesn't wait quietly in a closet. Sometimes it stands up, all at once, and makes the whole room understand exactly what it's been missing.